Liquid Guilds, race to world first after dark.
With Veyloris
and Kams.
Wow.
Well, what an intro. Welcome to the Race to World's First After Dark show. I'm Kams. I'm here with Veyloris.
Yeah.
Before we get in, I'd like to remind everybody about the charity, Girls Who Code. You can go to tl.gg/rwf-donate if you want to give to that. They've been reading out donations in chat. And before we get into the topic, which is the history of Liquid, and then to Liquid, we'll get into that. Let's talk about the progression. What do you think about Lehuvum?
Well, I mean, it's dead.
Yeah.
I think it was, I don't know, it was a bit of a roller coaster because, like, of course, there's always that, like, kind of weird moment where you're worried that they're going to, like, nerf what we've been doing and waste a bunch of time. And then they didn't end up nerfing it after they I don't know if they told us. We thought whatever the tinfoil was, it was getting nerfed. We had it indicated to us that we weren't supposed to do it. And then they didn't end up nerfing it, and so it was kind of just like we left the raid, went and did Mythic Plus, which, like, as Max mentioned several times, is pretty inefficient, and then we ended up just going back in, and very little was changed. There was one hot fix, like a very minor nerf to the fight that wouldn't have affected us. Like, we could have just kept pulling when that went in there. So it was I think the boss is good. I'll say that much. I mean, it's definitely a very technical fight. It was very cool to watch them progress out how they wanted to ultimately solve the fight's challenges, but it definitely had some, I guess we'd call them, like, meta things that kind of made it a little weird. I don't know. How about you?
Yeah, I liked it. It's one of those fights that, like, you have to be doing it to work your way through. We talked about this on the desk, where you don't know what the combination of the robots are going to be beforehand, so you kind of just have to see them as you get there and then figure out how to deal with them so that you can see the next one and keep going. But I think they, like, systematically got it down pretty quick, and they didn't waste too much time getting baited by the, like, not trying to kill two because they thought it was going to get hotfixed. They just went and did, like, chores and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's definitely some potential for some tilting or some dobby, I suppose. Is
that what the dobby means?
That's what dobby is. Yeah, no dobby is no tilt. So I don't know. Overall, I mean, I'd say it was pretty good, and ultimately, I think it's one of those kills that, like Max said, it gets caught up pretty quickly. The challenge on that fight is certainly coming up with the initial strategy, but once you've kind of figured that out and worked out the kinks, it's like you just replicate it, and at that point, it's just execution and having the tier sets. Of course, primary competitor Echo pretty much has the tier set, so we're expecting them to kill that pretty quickly as they get to it tomorrow. But it's mostly a morale thing where it's like, you had a lot of potential for tilt today. Today was like a fiesta. They were in weak aura hell for a little bit, then they were in, like, bug fix, like, what's even going on hell, and then obviously the bridge didn't spawn, like, they couldn't get through, the door wasn't open, then the bridge didn't spawn, and then they're trying to swap blaster over this gap in the instance, and all of this stuff was just going wrong, and then eventually they got to the boss, and they were able to kill it. So it's like you dodged so much tilt, it's like a morale boost unto itself, and you're like, and now they get some off stream time on Halandra. So I think Lehuvum is mostly interesting, like, as a story point for the raid, like, as far as, like, a Liquid overcame everything and now they're feeling pretty good going into tomorrow. They get kind of an early bedtime. I would say is probably the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, some well-needed rest. And I believe we're going to play a replay of Lehuvum. If Echo managed to miss that one, they can catch it here.
Yes, perfect. I think that's with comms too. So.
With comms, yes.
Yeah, we get to hear every single little piece of it all. Let's jump to that.
Let's go!
Wheeler tier. Weird.
Weird. GG. At least it's not tiny.
Great job, dudes.
Not
Great job.
That was double normal to mythic tier. Easy.
Not bad.
Nice.
Yeah, it's easy.
Guys,
I think production's more excited than we are.
Weird.
Very weird. Okay, you asked me how I thought about that fight. Rewatching the replay, I think I actually really like that fight. It's a good fight. It's a really, really good mid-tier boss.
Yeah, it's a great fight. It's got single target burst. You save your cooldowns. There's some cleave. There's AoE burst. There's CC. There's space management. The fight kind of had it all. And then you could hear how excited they were. They, like, really needed that kill. They would have for sure had it tonight unless they ultra tilted, but where they got it was, like, perfect because they can get some of the off-stream pulls, and then also they can just call this whenever. unless they think they can push for a Halandra's kill, which I don't think is possible, and then they can get some rest because they went late last night. They kind of like reset from the potential
late
tilt
every night, actually.
Yeah,
like it's definitely gone on like the later side of things. Just I mean, it's been. I mean, I was just talking to some of the players, and like, I was just like, it just doesn't even feel like a race from like production side. We're just like over here, and it's just like it's so like. I mean, obviously it is, but it just feels like we've spent so much time doing non-race related activities where it's like we're not even sitting there like, like, oh, they kill it. Because normally when, back here, it's like when we're walking around, everybody's like always keeping an eye on monitors and we're like, oh, did they kill it? Are they close? Is it going to die today? And it's like for the past 2 days, it's been Mythic week, but we've just been like, everybody's been like, yeah, they're still doing splits. So it's been super weird. And this is kind of, I don't know, this feels like the start point where it's like, oh yeah, right. We are actually waiting to see this instance end.
Yeah, absolutely. They still do have a couple split bosses looming, and I don't know if do you think they even get to Jailer this week at all? Like, do they even care?
I mean, I'll be honest, I would have to look at the split table because like you will, or the loot table, because you will want that loot if there is anything unique off that boss, but if it only drops pieces that are redundant, which is to say if the opportunity cost of killing Jailer is basically just the difference between a heroic piece that's like slightly worse optimized or just a slightly better optimized heroic piece, I don't think you do, right? Because if you're just picking between like slightly better stats on a two-hander or something, like why go to the Jailer and spend the time progressing that? Nobody's killed it on heroic yet, which like doesn't mean they wouldn't. I mean, obviously they would be able to kill it, but it's just like, why spend the time?
Yeah,
you just get a slightly worse weapon. Don't give anybody else the info on it. Spend time in Mythic and like, yeah, I mean, we might be in a harrowing world where the world first guild doesn't achieve AOTC until after their CE.
Do you think CE comes first in the world before an AOTC?
That's a good question. I mean, it's a little bit like the first boss of the instance, right? Somebody's gonna early shift it, right? Like somebody is going to kill it eventually. They've just been there hammering into it because the longer it goes, the more tempting it is as a like more casual, whatever, like 8, 12, 16-hour guild to be like, dude, let's just add an extra night on. Like, let's just go Saturday and see if we get world first Jailer and just pull it for a while. Doubtless, it's probably killable. So they've said that they want the last boss on heroic to be about as hard as the first few on mythic. Okay. So it actually may not be killable for an average guild that doesn't have like a bunch of tier pieces.
Yeah, actually, you're right. But then that would make for a guild like Liquid, it could just be like a few hours. I'm just wondering like if they get in there and the thing's going to be like a 6-hour kind of weird, hard heroic boss.
I would assume it's going to take a couple of hours. They are geared extremely well. I think it depends on the comp. It's hard to say. I mean, the thing is it's like even if it's like 2 hours, it's like, man, there's just so little off the boss. I don't know. I think it's hard. There's no tier off the boss, and of course, speaking of tier, I think we have a little graphic to talk about a couple of the people on the fight, on the Lehuvim. Taking a look here at JP Clone, Trill Shaman, Atlas DK, and Pod H. I love this graphic, by the way. Thank you, Taylor. You're a genius. Just running across here, JP Clone is interesting, right? He's actually the only person in on that kill who only has a 2-piece and not a 4-piece equipped. Obviously, free JPC. I believe that's still going on. I'm actually not even sure. I need to check with the guilds, but sorry. Production immediately confirms. Yes. Operation Save JPC is there. You can check out the info on that in our Discord. But he does not have 4-piece, which is a shame. But despite that, he was pumping extremely hard on that boss, and he was actually pretty high up there on boss damage. So I thought that was pretty interesting and worth calling out. Also, you'll note that's Trilshan, not Blue Man Good, because Blue Man Good is very locked outside. He can't get 4-piece this week, so there is no Operation Save Impec. There is just Trilsham, who's just going to be the enhancement shaman for this week, because he has his 4-piece, and Blue Man Good, who's was our main enhancement shaman last year, unfortunately did not. I guess get good skill issue. Then these last two, Atlas, DK, and Pod, I just thought were interesting to have on here because those two were absolutely blasting this boss. Atlas on that Frost DK, first here in a while, they're showing up huge. And obviously this is like a bit of a pad fight. There's like 15, 20 target cleave. They get that huge breath, but he was definitely near the top there with that 4-piece. And I'm going to be honest, I know what the 2-piece does because he basically just gets 8% crit and it's basically just 8% damage all the time. I actually just don't even know how that 4-piece works.
I believe it's a talent, but I don't know what it does. So you just proc some sort of damage. I think it just does like a little spike or something.
Yeah. I do know what the survival one does, though, and survival is obviously, peculiar. I mean, absolutely incredible to be seeing on any boss, much less, like kind of a later important boss. Padre was absolutely cleaning up on this boss. Those wildfire bombs basically just make their damage scale like linearly. So it's like 2 targets, they just do twice as much damage. 3 targets, they do 3 times as much damage, which is very uncommon in this game. So survival, on these bigger cleave fights, it just absolutely goes to town.
And I believe Malarcus was also survival near the end. He was marksman a lot and then went survival. And another interesting thing about this graph is Rogue, Enhanced Shaman, Frosty K survival. That you brought it up that you don't see Frosty K much, but these are all kind of odd specs. I mean, Rogue's had tiers where it's really good, but Liquid's not really been a rogue guild. There have been like guilds that just stack tons of rogues in the past for progression, and Liquid's not one of them. So these 4 here are kind of outlier specs in the norm.
Yeah, I would
used to.
Definitely agree. Very interesting to see. Just kind of catching up on the tier things there. It's pretty crazy the amount of 4 sets that they have managed to get together on all of this.
24, I believe.
I think it's 27.
Man.
I have 27 mains that I have down in the spreadsheet, and I know that there are a couple of 4 pieces not tracked on there. On this graphic, I almost asked that they bring in Scott DK. I forget what his character is called, because I was like, oh well, he doesn't have 4-piece, but he was in there because the AOE grip is that good. No, his DK actually does have 4-piece, and I was like assuming that it didn't, but like
the tanks are blessed this tier.
Dude, tanks are very blessed. Yeah, he's got 2 characters with 4-piece, and I don't know. I don't even know what else Twisted has. Twisted needs nothing. He just got that natty 4-piece coming out of nowhere. You love to see it.
Do you happen to know if they intentionally tried to get Scott the 4-piece on the Pally and the DK, or that was just like a happen chance?
I have no idea. I mean, to be honest, it would make sense. I mean, I think DK is kind of thought of as the 3rd best tank right now in general for this tier. I think it's Paladin, and then kind of Monk and DK are sort of on that 2nd tier with Paladin pretty distinctly in, I guess you'd call it like S tier. So I mean, it would make sense, but also the Blood DK tier sets are, I would call, a little lacking in raid for the most part. I mean, it's worth having. It's good. It's a power gain, but it's much bigger in like Mythic Plus and that kind of thing. And typically when you're bringing in a Blood DK, you're bringing it in for something like this where it's like, oh, we just need a mass grip, and you're not too concerned about like, oh, I need every bit of DPS out of the tank. So I don't know. He may have just been blessed. I'm not really sure.
Yeah. All right. Enough of these tier sets. Let's get into our main segment, which is the history of how we got here, which is long. We'll do our best to condense it. I could probably tell stories for hours about different tiers and raids and all the different members, but we have a nice slideshow here. Also, I'm not sure. It's somewhere on the Liquid website. There's a big timeline that we're pulling a lot of these slides from that goes through the history, and you can see a lot of quotes from Tags and THD, maybe some for Azarea. I think she's in there, the guild manager.
It's mostly Tags. Tags is the smiling face of Limit/Liquid for the most part.
Yeah, THD's got some kind of meme recaps in there. You know how they are.
It's THD content.
Yeah. So we bring those up. All right, so it's a weird start. They put I was going to maybe leave this out because I was kind of working on this side by side. I didn't know they were doing a full production on the site with this. But WildStar is kind of where a lot of the guild members met. And if people don't remember, around 2014, it's Siege of Orgrimmar Farm. People were really bored. It's kind of recently like how players went to Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
They kind of hopped onto a new MMO coming out that was aiming the content at hardcore raiders. And a lot of us were bored, wanted to check it out. So we were in there doing some of the bosses with some people from Blood Legion, I think mostly. And I think like Just Wait from Method was in there, and we've got a clip of that so you can kind of see what it looks like. There's a lot of visuals on the ground like Final Fantasy, and then you could have like a roll. It's very mobile, and like the rotations are actually pretty good. It had some good fights.
Yeah, I played WildStar. I was not in the Cool Kids Guild.
You didn't get to try the...
No, but
did you raid?
I did raid. Yeah, no, dude, that game was... Oh yeah, you can see it on screen here. WildStar was a wild game. No pun intended.
Yeah, very action-packed, kind of like a techie future robot kind of game. And I'm trying to look at the raid frames. They're hard to see, but I think you can see like tags and... Or maybe tags is in there, but True Fire was. I think Jet was playing along with Max, and that's kind of where they met people from other guilds and were like, hey, you're kind of good at MMOs, and I think that planted a seed. And then we got another slide for... Oh, yeah, so here's down on here. Nightmare Asylum, Blood Legion, they stopped raiding competitively, and there were some people who still wanted to raid. They didn't want to go hardcore, and Max and Tags were in Duality at the time, and they kind of were getting sick of the guild, so they decided to join and create this new guild, Limit, which I believe happened in Blackrock Foundry. Like, that's about when Duality died, was on Blackhand. So they got together, and there was True Fire, Max, Tags, Preheat, True Fire's GM, Jet, and Errold. He was one of the, like a young mage extraordinaire. He has since gone. And, let's see, we got...
Yeah, no, it's a pretty spectacular time in general for the guild. Blackhand killed quite a few guilds, which I think contributed to it, because I think just before or just after... around that time, we had just started to see Midwinter start to kind of fall apart as well. And like, I mean, at the time, Nightmare Asylum, Duality, Midwinter, and I'm missing one in there. But yeah, those are kind of the guilds that had really pressed into the mythic mode. Nightmare Asylum had been the previous U.S. top 10 man at the end of MOP, and there's a lot of really good players, and because a lot of those guilds were scaling from 10 up into 20 mans, they were very, very volatile sort of conglomerations, because you were being essentially forced to add 10 people to a team of people that probably already had a pretty, well-knit dynamic. So a lot of guilds died in Blackrock Foundry, because High Mull had just come right before it, which was like an easier tier, and then right after Blackhand, notoriously super difficult, super comp-intensive fight, and a lot of guilds just did not stand that test, which was obviously to the benefit of Limit, who scooped up a lot of players at that point.
Yeah, and then later on in the timeline, kind of in HFC, that's kind of where Limit popped up in the, became real, basically, is they got US First Archimond, and we have a clip showing their kill. It's I'm not sure if we'll have audio, but it's very patriotic, very US First.
Yeah. I remember, so at the time, my guild was dead, and I was just running around in Tanan Jungle as a little warlock, and I remember watching this, the US First Archimond kill. It's blaring. It's like it has Born in the USA. Oh, those nerd screams. As you can see, the eagle and the flag in the bottom left.
Yeah, there they are. I was in Midwinter at the time, and if people didn't know follow the race back then, Midwinter was like kind of the expected guild to get world first on this. They got world third on Blackhand, which was crazy at the time because U.S. guilds had kind of fallen off to that point. So everyone was kind of expecting it, and we stumbled a lot, took some breaks, and the Limit just went in there, got world 11th, U.S. first, and, they kept that up from then on out. And also, this is about when they got Azareya, who is now the general manager of Liquid MMO. So she's been in the game with these players pretty much since the beginning, because which is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, and at that point, I mean, nobody really knew what was kind of starting with everything. Because, I mean, relatively speaking, I mean, I guess Echo is a very young guild as well, but obviously has the pedigree of a lot of, European players that have been in, top-end guilds for a while. I would say kind of have an identifiable culture to them, even despite, some different namings and all of that. But, like, Limit, relatively speaking, is a pretty young guild and very new to that like, world race. So it's kind of interesting to be able to go back and be like, yep, this is the raid where it happened and we started to be really big. It was an exciting time.
Yeah, and I'm sure it probably, like, the domination probably just planted in their heads, like, maybe, because they were going less hardcore because a lot of them came from Blood Legion and they didn't want to do that grind anymore. And a lot of those Blood Legion people aren't left anymore because they got, the raid extended and expanded, or the guild did, the times anyways. And then that leads us to Legion. Right before Legion came out, the old GM Truefire, he took off. I'm not fully caught up on the lore on that, but we'll let him tell that story. And that's where Jet became GM, who is one of the casters you'll see on the desk. He's still very much part of the guild.
Yeah, well, and I was curious. So this is still before my time being in Limit. Now, 30 minutes before the expansion begins, I distinctly remember that Legion launched at 2:30 a.m. our time because I had an alarm set only to vibrate because I didn't want my wife to wake up to know that I was getting up to level right at 2:30 a.m. when the servers came out. Now, did he? Or actually, no, Legion came out in the evening. I'm thinking of BFA, I think. There was an expansion. No, maybe it was Legion. I don't remember. Did he quit, I think it was in the middle of the night, wasn't it? Like, it had to have been.
I think they were all kind of, like, waiting for, in-game, waiting for the server or the, expansion to tick over, and he just was gone. That's what I wasn't in it. I think that's what I remember.
Yeah, I wish I'd asked Tags about this because I'm just desperately curious. But it's obviously an odd happenstance. But like Tags had the quote on there. Truefire played a pretty pivotal role in keeping the guild together through a fairly rocky time and leading it to some initial success, which ended up snowballing. So not trying to throw aspersions or anything, but I assume there has to be an interesting anecdote in there somewhere.
Yeah, and he's actually an analyst for Echo now, so he's still in the game.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I really being an analyst for one of the top end guilds, I would say is pretty dang in the game, all things considered, which is interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, and so then later in Legion we get to Nightfall, which they got World 5th on Gul'dan. Oh, also, in typical fashion, forgetting Emerald Nightmare, Xavius.
Skimming right over Xavius. I can't believe you forgot that one. Oh, wow, you guys, US first Xavius. Incredible. I can't believe that happened.
Yeah, and they sponsored with Northern Gaming, and that helped them get a lot of partners on Twitch when that was really hard to do, so that kind of helped some of the guild members keep going because the schedule can be so grueling. If you have no money coming in with WoW and you're putting that much time to raid, it can be pretty hard to keep going. And then this is when Nightfall, sorry. Another
Nightfall.
World 5th, which is very good for a guild that was raiding the hours they were at the time on Gul'dan. And then that goes into when the guild runs into some trouble with Helya, the ban era. I don't know if we want to name it something, but the Dark Ages.
This is when Limit started to kind of develop the. So Limit got banned alongside Exorcist, and it was admittedly I think Limit struggled with more of a PR than an ethics issue because it's really the banning around the Helya exploit is kind of similar to the Lich King Serenite bombs, where it's it feels more like a miscommunication than it does somebody really deliberate. Obviously it is an exploit, it's not the game working as intended, but it was also something that the devs let go on for a really long time to the point where you're I think we are allowed to do this, and it wasn't super clear exactly how it was even functioning. You were stopping the boss from doing an ability, but it wasn't it just was not obvious what was exactly happening in the game. But Limit has always had very much like a sort of like they're very cloistered guild historically speaking, up until obviously now where they're one of the most broadcast guilds in the world. But at the time it was a very tight knit guild. They didn't have like a super active presence in the community, so it was like one of those things where it was just like, oh yeah, Limit got banned for cheating, and that's really all you heard down the grapevine. And so despite the fact that it was a kind of an innocuous ban, Limit started to kind of pick up a reputation for being a little bit illicit, which is, of course, no spoilers, later reinforced.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where if people don't know, you could sacrifice I believe you sacrificed your tank as Helia was casting the breath, which made her not do the mechanic. You didn't have to do soaks, and it made it a lot easier. But then if you did that, she would just stop casting the breaths. And I believe that's the reason it was bannable, is because it just eliminated a mechanic from the fight. And yeah, that was a start. Like, they're kind of the bad boys of WoW raiding at that time. And then that goes into Tuma Sargeras, where they ran into a lot of bans with from doing real money kind of sales and boosting. It was a lot more common in its time, and that's kind of put the stop to it. Is everybody saw what happened to Limit and backed off from that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I would say as an outsider, this is because again I was not inside the guild at this point. This is definitely when Limit kind of had its the reputation of just being like, I don't want to see cheaters, but just like kind of a negative connotation to the name, because they got banned twice within banned twice within like 13 months or something, less than that, like 10 months. And so you're like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, they're just the US first guild and they cheat a lot. Cool, I guess.
Yeah, and some of the players, they got banned and then they had a bunch of mirror alts and then they just transferred those to other accounts and then were playing those ones, and then those ones got banned. And so they had to take some time off before KJ to like re-gear things up, but then still managed to get US first on KJ.
Yeah, wow, that's so impressive. I can't believe you guys got US first despite getting banned. There's just so much competition. Yeah, so you really lapped everyone, huh, guys? At this point, I mean, for a lot of BFA, the U.S. was kind of perceived as essentially a dead, not BFA, Legion. The U.S. was essentially just a dead competitive region as far as rating went. I mean, there was, you had seen in the last expansion, previous mainstays, Duality, Blood Legion, and Midwinter all die within, basically 12 months of each other. And so these three names that kind of represented the U.S. in the top 10 globally were all gone, and Limit was rating, don't get me wrong, pretty hardcore hours. I mean, at this point, they were still rating 6 nights a week, but not day rating at all, not really going, too hardcore by the standards of what it took to be, top 5 worlds. So, and basically we're the only guild in the U.S. even rating that much. So it was kind of a weird time for the U.S. to be represented, internationally. Yeah,
and then the final boss of the expansion, Argus, and we have a clip for that as well. That was the first. I'm trying to remember if they day rated in Tomb. I'm not sure. Maybe the bands got in the way, but Argus or Antorus for sure day rated, and the guild went pretty hard. Got a lot of world firsts in the beginning on the first day, and then finished out world 5th with this Argus. And we were free.
And I think this was your first tier with the guild?
I joined Nighthold Farm.
Nighthold Farm. Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha. So you were there in TOS. Yeah, makes sense.
Evaded the bans.
That was the last tier before Lighty joined. Because he joined going into BFA, I believe.
Okay.
I don't know why I know that specifically, but I know my Ben lore.
That's a good one to know. That's a good member to know.
It is. I'm a Ben enjoyer for sure. I've always admired his prowess at the games, PoE, World of Warcraft, and otherwise.
Yeah. So that leads us straight into Battle for Azeroth, where the guild decided to start going a little more hardcore. And it was pretty early before Old Deer came out. They decided that they wanted to push. And so it wasn't like a full, a ton of prep going in, knowing they're going to do world first. It was kind of on their world first pushing, I guess.
Yeah.
It was kind of on their mind. And then they just decided to pull the trigger right before Old Deer came out. And
Sorry, I was just gonna say it's like one of those things where like, you know, and I even remember thinking at the time, again, still being outside the guild, like, oh, okay, yeah, I mean, you guys are day rating, like, of course you're going for world first, but you know, with the perspective I have now on it, it's like just choosing to day raid a week before the raid comes out is not the same as going for world first. I mean, the amount of prep difference just in terms of like knowing all of the bosses before you step into the raid and having enough of a runway that you're not having to stop raid to learn the next boss, because I mean that's one of the biggest issues you run into day raiding is like you run out of prep because you just get to a boss that you have not had a chance to spend a bunch of time learning, because you have to have learned all of the bosses ahead of time without videos, and that's the biggest challenge of Mythic, of world first raiding. So it's not just raid 16 hours, it's actually be able to raid for 16 hours and not spend a bunch of time trying to figure out strats or at least learn mechanics and stuff. You have to have a lot of stuff done. So in retrospect, I think I have a lot better of an appreciation for how much of an accomplishment Old Deer actually was for the guild, just saying, hey, let's do it. And this was, I mean, I remember this is the first point where I was ever like, yeah, you know what, the USA owns, screw Europe, like, let's get it. That's the patriotism kicking in because of Mithrax and all that.
This is where like the distilling of all the US players who had just like tried and failed to go out to that world first, were just kind of collecting into a single guild, and yeah, it paid off. And even though they didn't get world first on Gahoon, there was Mithrax, which we have a clip of, where they got world first, and this was a big kill. I mean, the early bosses are kind of a given for US guilds to get world first on, and Mithrax was the first like really difficult boss that they were able to kill.
And I mean, this boss is, so this boss in an alternate reality is very similar to what I think Painsmith was last tier, where you see a guild, like, because typically in a race, when somebody's ahead and then they get leapfrogged and the person who leapfrogged them kills the next boss, you're like, oh, that's huge. Like, they are very ahead. And that is exactly what Mithrax was, where Method killed Feta Devourer after some nerfs, and then they killed Zool really quickly. And then, we saw Limit do the same thing and then go on to kill Mithrax before them, and you're like, oh my God. Like, and then the whole meme at the time was, first to the moon, first to Goon, I mean, it was, I think this is probably the first time I remember the community actually rallying around Limit in any meaningful way. Because it's, it is very exciting to be once again like, hey, we actually have a guild to root for and see, representing us on the world stage. And even though this is only, I guess it would be just over a year or just under a year from the TOS bannings, no, just over a year, like 14 months from the TOS bannings, I think a lot of that had kind of started to be forgotten, so this is, I think, kind of the start of the new Limit brand a little bit, where they were rebirthed and kind of started being appreciated in the community just a little bit more. Yeah,
and shout out to Jet. He was in on that Mithrax. He wasn't a raider at the time, but they needed a second Demon Hunter, I believe, and so he came in and got world first Mithrax.
I did not know that lore.
Yeah,
that is super interesting.
Sneaky Jet lore, he snuck in there. And you could see all the Warlocks, which came in handy for Gahoon because you wanted like 5 of them for the gateways.
You wanted a lot of Warlocks on Goon. Of course, Goon ended up being kind of a tragedy there with the...
Yeah.
I mean, we can't talk about it enough about the Vantis Rune nerf. This, obviously, the kill on screen right now, this came on Tuesday after reset. They chose to extend because we didn't know about the Vantis Rune nerf. So the Vantis Rune got nerfed by about 1.5%. So they are actually almost weaker on that Tuesday than they were on the Monday because of how big that Vantis Rune nerf was, which is like an honest-to-God tragedy. You can see exactly how close that kill was, like 18, 17 people dead. It was
yeah, and I picked that clip. It starts at like 2% or something like that, and you can see how long that 2% was.
Oh yeah,
it was a very spicy end of that kill. And then so the next tier, Jaina, pushing hard again to go for a world first. And this is interesting. They had tags calling out healer cooldowns in Jaina, which was kind of like other guilds had done it in the past, but it was the first time Limit had someone outside the raid doing some sort of delegation to the players.
Yeah, it was the start of the Eagle.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there was some weird stuff with the last phase of Jaina where we didn't think you could burn it. Method knew you could burn it, and we got baited trying to kill the elemental and deal with the ice blocks instead of just zerging the boss.
This is such an epic kill right there. Lip in Bubble being the last man standing. Dude, that is, I will say, that is I wouldn't call Limit a guild known for their kill videos. I would say, that is probably Paragon in terms of quality and certainly Method in terms of quantity. I think some of my favorite kill videos are Paragon, and it's like Limit just doesn't. It's never been a high effort kill video guild, but that is one of the higher effort kill videos. I would highly recommend watching that Jaina kill video. It is a very good video, and obviously has a we'll call it very, very climactic, cool ending. That's a good one.
And it's a very visually beautiful fight, I think. As much as I didn't really like the Blizzard mechanic, it does look cool.
I loved that boss.
You liked the mechanic?
Yeah, I honestly liked Jaina. Zyronic asked us what was our top 3 favorite bosses. I actually probably should have said Jaina for one of those.
You start on the boat, then she freezes. That stuff is so cool. And doing the wall and
I loved. I played prop paladin on that boss, and I loved getting to Sky Step Potion plus. Spell warding and go and soak up a bunch of things and go and interrupt the other 2 ads and all of that. It was a very fun fight. A very, very fun fight. I personally really liked it.
Yeah. And so the next tier was Crucible of the Storms, 2-boss tier, came out between BOD and Eternal Palace, and Limit just kind of decided that they would take it a little easier because doing world first progression back to back like that is pretty grueling, and people have to get time off work, and another tier's coming, so you don't want to burn your time off and your effort on doing a whole just for the 2 bosses. It's kind of known in the race community, those raids aren't the real race, and that the real ones come out with the full tier, everyone gets a new set of gear. So they took that a little easier, which led to Eternal Palace, where I'm not sure, did Red Bull reach out to Limit? I know there was some stuff with Method doing a raid with Red Bull before, and they invited Limit people to go to London to the gaming sphere, and they flew by 14, 15 of us, 17 of us out there.
I was lucky number 17. That's why I know.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. No, I was certainly a life-changing sort of event for me.
Yeah, that's where Veyloris, he'd made his casting debut.
It is.
Ashvane, tank, soaker.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, you can see it. Some of the raiders there, gamer posing.
We love the gamer pose. Of course, I think it's so. That's Ben on the left there, Willie B between him and Max. Max in the back in the center there. Then obviously THD. And on the right there, that beautiful man is, of course, Refute. Unfortunately, a gorgeous young man who no longer raids with us. But as far as I was actually just talking to Tags about him the other day. It sounds like he's doing quite well in real life. Which,
good.
Yes,
That's
which
good.
we always love to see. It's always nice to catch up with old raider buddies and hear that they're doing well.
Big brain on the bench. Shout out Refute.
Big brain on the bench.
Yeah, and that tier, it was awesome because we all got to London and everybody got to be together. And it was the first time that these players had been to an event like this, and it's very validating to spend so much time on something like this and to kind of have it, all the production and being on land, the casters, the only problem was we were in London and the jet lag was insane, and we were raiding on U.S. times, going to bed at 7 a.m., waking up, I don't even know, whenever.
Yeah, it was. I know I was waking up at 1:30 every day normally and walking there. I was doing the afternoon casting shift with Rich normally, and you guys were coming in, and we were supposed to start raid at 4 p.m. local time, but we kept drifting later and later and later. So obviously London is 6 hours after when we normally did it. So to raid it at 10, we'd be starting at 4 p.m., which would then mean that instead of ending at midnight, we'd be ending at 6 a.m., which I don't know if you know this, but raiding in a basement for 16 hours and then getting out and walking through the streets of London where the sun is coming up is just it's a bit of a mind bender for sure. 10 days in a row. It's
something where you don't want to complain because it was awesome, but just for the environment to do something like this, it did have a toll on everybody, and
for sure
it was so close, and it was absolutely, at least for me, it was soul crushing that we didn't get the world first. We missed it by just a couple of hours. I think 6 hours. I can remember waking up, looking at my phone, and just heart sinking. because we had a different strat than Method did at the time, where they were going, again, like Jaina, we're just going pure burn and trying to skip, I'm forgetting like one of the console clicks or something like that.
Yeah.
And we were doing all of them. They thought it was impossible.
Both guilds thought the other guild's strategy was impossible.
Yeah.
So it was one of those weird situations where everybody was like, they're doing it wrong. And at the end of the day, like, you know, I mean, they got the world first on it, obviously, but we killed it the same lockout, same gear.
Yeah.
It's like both strats were fine. It just kind of came down to how guilds executed. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I had to point, and you know, you have a slightly larger resolution, but I mean, if I had to point to a low point in the guild, I mean, it definitely feels like that. I mean, I remember how soul crushing that was. I mean, it's, you know, so Method killed it. It was like, I think it was like 4:30 or 5 o'clock local time in London, and you know the guild filtered in. We had been up extremely late the night before. You guys were raiding until I think it was like 9 or almost 10 a.m. because you guys knew, you know, like if you guys didn't kill it, there was a very solid chance that it would be dead before you had a chance to raid again, which was accurate. And so, you know, everybody was just like coming in assuming it would be dead, which is already a soul-crushing feeling. I mean, that was the least fun walk we ever had back, you know, where it's just like everybody knew the boss hadn't died, and it was just like, well, that's that. And yeah, that was soul-crushing is, I think, the best adjective.
Yeah, and that was another experiment in the 21st Man. It was the first, like, a lot more raid leady type. That was Padra, the survival hunter now. He was doing the calls for soaking because the fight was so complicated on his own. And then you had to deal with like going to all these different spots and draining energy only to a certain amount of stacks and trying to line of sight different things. And so just having somebody who would just be like, this person, now this person, and you would just go like soak up stacks, and he could watch the different energies on the different pillars and let people know if different ones need to be drained.
Yeah.
And I believe we have a clip of the soul-crushing but exciting. Everyone is very excited because we thought we might have to fly home and it would have just been like completely over. But we managed to like pull it off the final day.
Yeah, no, it is amazing how excited everybody managed to get. Also, Supreme on screen there. He actually he's raiding an Aster now. Oh my goodness, this boss, that boss room still just like gives me like PTSD almost. It's just like that looking down.
Titan console explodes. 1% left above the boss, and they get it. Hey! Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
I'm pretty reserved, but this one I remember I was like, as everyone exploded and the boss was just barely not dying, I was like punching my chair.
Yeah.
It was so relieving to kill it. Sucks it wasn't world first, but you know, the guild learned a lot, and I think.
So I have a fun bit of lore about that. So that was the literal pull that we were transitioning between casters. Nobody casted that live on the desk.
Oh, that's right.
The people who are commentating there right now was, I think it was Gelu, Jack, and one of the Brits. I think it was Jackie, and they went back and they had to re-record the commentating over it because they wanted to have the commentation over it, but nobody was actually live on the desk, so it was like a totally silent stream of the kill originally, which is, I think, just hilarious. I was very sad when that happened too, because I was getting transitioned off the cast, so we were literally like getting up and walking around, and I remember walking around to the monitor behind like kind of where we hung out when we weren't on cast, and I was just like, are they actually going to kill it? Are they actually going to kill it? And then they killed it. Nobody was on there. I was like, oh, well, that's a bummer, I guess.
Yeah, and I think each one of the tiers in BFA, the guild learned just a little bit more, got a little closer, kind of through in just different ways. This one, I would say, was maybe due. I mean, it could have, bad play. There was some weird tuning stuff, but I think a lot of it, for me personally, I'd put it on the jet lag.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, I put it on Ashvane, to be honest. And I think if I had to point to the spot that Method gapped the hardest, it was Ashvane. You can talk about the hot fixes if you want, and I think that there's something to be said there about getting caught up on. But if I had to point to like where Method gapped us that raid, it was Ashvane, because like they came in and they killed Ashvane in 30 pulls, and it took us 110 because because they had a strategy that we did not consider in terms of the kiting and the soaking of the bubbles, and it's just like, that's that to me is like you don't see those pull differentials all that often, and when they happen, I feel like you have to look at those and be like, yeah, I mean that guild got gapped. Like we got gapped on Painsmith last tier. We gapped everybody on in our first world, for not to jump ahead, but when we got our first world first, we gapped people extremely hard on oh my gosh, what's the boss, the technical boss, Drestgath. We had like 17 pulls to the next closest guild's like 60.
Yeah. And another little tidbit from Ashara before we move on to the next slide was Max on second to last boss. I'm blanking on its name. Zakul. It was a one tank fight, so Max could just stay out of the raid, and he started raid leading, and yeah, that led into Nyalotha, where Max decided, I'm just going to be the 21st man outside the raid. I'm just going to take on all the responsibilities, just handhold people. And I think, like, after all these soul-crushing losses, it was just like, okay, we're going to do everything we possibly can to make sure we win. And that's where we got the analysts. We got Bubba and Siori started doing more analyst stuff rather than raiding. Also, this is where Complexity stepped in and picked up the guild so that we could keep doing the events, which was awesome. We got the add-on devs. We did stuff with DBM. I think, was Relo doing it then, or was it someone else doing weak auras?
Yeah, it was Relo during Nyalotha and Mystical OS. We were using DBM for that tier. We used DBM for that tier, and I think as well in Nathria. So it was Mystical OS, the DBM kind of soul developer, and then Relo.
Yeah, and this is basically where all the lessons of like the whole expansion kind of came together, and the guild. I mean, it showed you learned from the lessons because they absolutely destroyed on N'Zoth, getting the first world first in the U.S. since Empress Shek'Zir in Mista Pandaria. The first end boss of like a whole tier that had ever happened, I think, in the history of WoW. So that was very awesome, and we have a clip of that. And this one's every time I watch this clip, it gives me chills. It's emotional. It's great. And you can see, the fire mage is this tier. You can watch him jumping around.
14 seconds out of it.
Tanks, I'll tell you when you're kiting. Tanks are kiting in 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, you can just see just the amount of focus you have for weeks on end, and it just all releases at once. It's finally over, and there are parts you can see Max. He's kind of like huddled up, just like.
Well, my favorite part about that, because I remember Max talking about this in an interview, is that he actually does a literal triple take on the monitor when it dies. He stands up, looks over, looks back at the monitor, and then looks over, and then looks back at the monitor. And he was like, "Yeah, it's because I wasn't sure if we were getting the achievement, if the boss had actually died, if there's another phase." It's like that moment where you're just like, I did this actually just happen?
Yeah, because the enrage was so tight. They had some where it was like it basically looked like they killed it, and then they were just dead.
Yeah.
And so, you can see him there delaying his excitement and then releasing. And, so that kind of set Limit up, like, see if they can pull this off again, which led into the COVID tier, Nathria.
Yeah.
Where they did get the back-to-back. They added tags as a 22nd man. And he does healer cooldowns, and I'm not sure if we got more analysts. I think that kind of stayed the same.
Yeah, Nathria didn't actually change too much. I think Nathria was a weird tier. I don't think this was a tier where we gapped Echo. I think Echo Or sorry, I guess between those tiers, you saw Method turn into Echo essentially, and then Method was obviously sort of benched for that tier as they rebuilt. But Echo was obviously just like slightly worse than us that tier, but they were still very close. The big thing is that Echo and Limit gapped everybody else crazy hard. Like they killed the boss, I think like 16 hours or 20 hours after us or something like that, and then they didn't actually, and then the next person didn't kill the boss until I think it was like 120 or 150 hours later or something, which is like a remarkably large gap, So those two guilds, Echo and Limit, obviously, based on Nathrio, we were like, yep, they're the front runners. They're the people to watch going into Sanctum, which, obviously is kind of an easy assumption, but it's still just impressive to see the level of difference those guilds had over everybody else.
Yeah, and in the clip, you'll be able to see that there are some people playing from home, and then there were some that went into the bubble, basically, and they were at the Complexity Center together. And my favorite part of it is like near the very end, you can see Max like tackle fired up. So watch for that in this clip. Again, the release, the screaming. I guess everybody has a good reaction. FT Bubbler, he like eats his mic. He just does a big like right into the mic.
There's going to be seeds right out of this. Place good seeds.
Oh, this is a fantastic fight.
Okay, place good seeds here. Melee, get ready to soak them. Good. There's a knockback in 4 seconds. Knockback in 3.
Careful soaking this. 2,
1. Now, and just stay alive. Stay alive. Ignore seeds.
Let's go, dude.
Wait, chill.
Fucking go!
Come on.
Yes, let's.
Yeah, and maybe he's always got a great reaction.
Yeah.
Just screaming.
I mean, and you can see why they do it, right? I mean, that's the one time Mavie shows emotion is when they lock in a world first, right? It's those moments where they're just like, that's when you're alive, is when you're getting the world first, you're getting to compete. So it's a very, very, very cool moment that they get to experience. It's cool to see the guys come alive in that moment, and that's a very good one. And like you said, Denathrius, really good boss fight, really good boss fight. The tuning, I don't know. I mean, it's like, it was good.
I felt like it was like right on point.
I mean, you're not wrong. I'm trying to like come up with an elegant way of saying it. I mean, it is a good fight and it is a good first boss of the expansion, but like, I don't know. It was a little bit, I guess I was feeling like I wanted it to go longer, but they did save Christmas, so I guess I can't complain too much.
That was a great part. It was killed. What was that on the Christmas Eve?
23rd.
Or the 23rd. Okay, saved Christmas. So thank you. Or you're welcome, sorry. Thank you and you're welcome.
Thank you and you're welcome. Easy.
And that was the back-to-back. I think that was the Discord name for a while, was the back-to-back. So, and that led into Sylvanas, lost Bubba. Maybe there was like Domination Shard weirdness. Sylvanas, kind of a strange end boss, being very gear checky. I mean, not making excuses. The tier Echo deserved that tier, especially for the way
I mean,
Limit played on Painsmith.
We got gapped on Painsmith pretty significantly, and then also on and see, this is kind of one of those like interesting cases where like obviously, like I mentioned before, Limit kind of had a reputation as being sort of unethical gamers, going back to I guess it was really all stuff that happened in Legion, but in my experience, the guild has been outstandingly paranoid when it comes to exploits, and it's like at the slightest hint that something might not be intended, if we can't get it confirmed that it's fine, we just don't do it. And that's actually kind of what happened on KT, where everybody was like, oh yeah, why weren't you guys just sacking the tanks to stop the ads from spawning? And it's like, oh, I mean, we knew you could do that, but we assumed that was very not intended. And it wasn't intended, but nonetheless, it was allowed to happen. And that's part of the difficulty of being a world first guild, is that it's like sometimes it is an exploit that they don't like and they will stop and they will hotfix, and then sometimes it's something they'll let happen and then they'll fix at the next win. And sometimes if you do it, they'll ban you. And it's like, it's very hard to know where that line is, and this guild just tends to kind of operate on the safer side of that. And I mean, that definitely hurt. But also, I mean, we got gapped just crazy hard on Painsmith.
And losing Bubba was hard. I feel like the splits, they for sure would not like they are now. They weren't optimized as well as they could have been. And again, another Limit really does learn from the lessons and the mistakes they make. And so now the splits are crazy optimized. They have like extra analysts pretty much just to like handle a lot of that load because it is a ton of work.
Yeah.
And that leads into where we are now, which is Limit turning into Liquid, and like the current era of Liquid Limit. But just Liquid. Team Liquid. So yeah, very exciting. We've got all the analysts. I mean, we don't know what is going to happen. We've killed many Anduins. They're working hard on this.
It's
excited.
hard to even imagine at this point like what the next step forward is in terms of like organization. I mean, it's having a dedicated group of analysts, having dedicated weak aura two dedicated weak auras people, having dedicated boss mod person. You know, it's like we now have a dedicated salesperson. You know, we have people helping at the bank and stuff. I mean, it's, you know, between BG and I also with the bank. I mean, it's like we have just a lot of support staff. I've counted. I think it's like 11 or 12 or something like that, which is just, I mean, it's crazy. And to be fair, it still feels like there is, you know, just too much for these groups of people to do. So who knows? Maybe we'll see it expand further. But at this point, it feels like, you know, one of the biggest things that we're going to see is you know, roster management come into play. You know, it's like the guild can offer enough that you can really kind of get the players you want. I think that's probably going to be the biggest key is retaining the best players and identifying you know, players, which I think has been kind of not. I mean, it's always been a factor for guilds, but when you can offer a lot more, like I think the pool of recruits is larger than it's ever been, given that, you know, you can be a professional WoW player now.
Yeah, it used to be so hard to find people to recruit for these kind of guilds because they need to be able to take off like 2 weeks and then however much time out of their lives do the grinding and the prep, like every 6 months, and it's random. You never get any notice. Like, you have to have a very flexible job. So, yeah, signing with someone like Team Liquid, like, really helps increase the pool, and then it brings attention to it as well because you can see the players, like, out there, and you're like, oh, I want to do that. It's not just, like, hidden on WoW Progress or Radar.io, and it's just, like, weird numbers and kind of nerdy stuff. It's, like, a little more mainstream, and so it's been really awesome.
Yeah, I mean the number of, you know, like when people whisper people in the guild to say funny things about wanting to join or you know, volunteer information or that kind of thing, which we, you know, of course appreciate our community greatly. The number of messages like that get screenshotted and people are talking about being funny or whatever has greatly increased as things have gotten more and more visible with Complexity and now Liquid, where it's like, yeah, I mean the guild is very much in the limelight in a way that, you know, previously speaking they really weren't. So I'm interested to see, you know, exactly how the roster curation continues.
Yeah, and that's where our timeline ends, right to this present moment. So what do you think's in store for tomorrow? I mean, we saw them get the Lahuvum and the Pantheon today, doing the Halandris. We've been doing this, so I couldn't see what their polls were.
Yeah, I was going to say,
they want me doing any hints.
Out of everybody in this room, we are the two biggest trumps. I have no idea. I don't know if production was watching their Halandris kills. Oh, I'm getting the finger. We do know they did say they were pulling off stream. Wink, wink. But I have no idea how those polls went. So I mean, that boss could have never gotten below 99%. It could have been 1%. I have no clue. It could have died actually, and I don't know. I mean, I guess we probably would have been told, but I have no idea what to expect for tomorrow. I'm going to be honest, looking at Halandris, I was like, I mean, this seems like, you know, whatever, 20-50 pull boss, but the general sentiment I've gotten from the Raiders is that is going to be an extremely challenging boss, and they're going to be on that for a majority of tomorrow. I think we'll see Anduin, but it sounds like it might be later in the day. I don't know. How about you?
Yeah, I think we'll see Anduin. I'm really excited. Halandris looks awesome, and Anduin, of course, is going to hopefully be a very memorable, legendary fight, and seems to be very difficult. So I'm excited. Do you have anything else to add about today?
No. I am glad that we are going to be the subtext here, of course, is the subtext here is, of course, that the gamers have been are now heading out of the studio, and we are wrapping things up just a little bit earlier here in Boston.
All right, I think that'll do it for tonight. I'm Kams.
I'm Veyloris.
All right, you guys have a good night. We'll be here bright and early. 9 a.m. Eastern?
I think it's 10 a.m. Eastern. I don't
Eastern?
I don't have the
10
magical
a.m.
sheet.
All right. And I'd like to give a shout out to the sponsors: Coinbase Wallet, Jersey Mike's, Secret Lab, Honda, Twitch, and Alienware, and also the charity, the United Nations Refugee Agency. If you go to tl.gg/UNHCR, you can give some money to the much-needed aid in Ukraine, the refugees. So you guys have a good night. Hopefully see you in the morning.
That was bananas.